David and Mary had given their entire lives to their 3 children, Anna, Michael, and Sarah. Their days of labor, sleepless nights, and every sacrifice had been for this one dream, that their children would grow up to have better lives. And now that dream seemed fulfilled. All 3 lived in the city, educated and employed. For David and Mary, that should have been the reward of their struggles. But life rarely unfolds the way parents hope. One quiet evening, when the children had come to visit, the dinner table turned into a battlefield. The warmth of family conversations was replaced by cold words and demands. Michael, the eldest, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Father, Mother," he began, his tone carrying more authority than respect, "you both should think practically now. This old house is falling apart. Sell it. With the money, we can invest in property in the city. It will be better for all of us." Mary froze with her spoon halfway to her lips. She looked at David, then back at Michael, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. "Sell this house?" she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Anna rolled her eyes. "Yes, Mother. Look at these walls, the cracked plaster, the leaky roof. You live in the past, clinging to memories. But memories don't pay bills, do they?" David's hands clenched tightly on his chair. His voice was steady but heavy, carrying the weight of years of sacrifice. "This house is not just bricks and wood. It holds every laugh, every tear, every step you 3 took as children. We built our lives here. How can you ask us to throw it away?" Sarah, the youngest, hesitated. She had always been softer than the other 2, but even she spoke timidly. "Father, maybe they're right. Times have changed. Maybe selling will make things easier." Mary's face crumpled. She set her spoon down, her hands trembling. "Easier for whom, Sarah? For you, or for us, who have nothing else?" The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. But instead of softening, the children hardened. Michael snapped, "You're being stubborn. Do you want us to suffer because you can't let go of old memories?" David's voice rose for the first time. "Suffer? Do you know what suffering means? Your mother skipped meals so you could eat. I worked until my hands bled so you could go to school. And now, after everything, you dare call this home a burden?" The air in the room grew thick with tension. Anna pushed her chair back sharply, her face red with frustration. "If you won't listen, then maybe we don't need to stay here anymore." Sarah looked down, avoiding their parents' eyes. Michael stood, cold determination on his face. "Think about it. Either you sell this house or don't expect us to come back. We won't waste our lives tied to your old-fashioned ways." David's chest heaved as he tried to find words, but none came. Mary's eyes filled with tears, her heart shattering with each word from her children's mouths. That night, after the children left the table, David and Mary sat in silence. No sound but the ticking of the old wall clock. For the first time, their dream of a happy old age with their children felt like it was crumbling, just like the plaster on the walls around them. Mary whispered through her tears, "What did we do wrong?" David couldn't answer. He just stared into the shadows of the home they had fought so hard to protect. And in that silence, both of them realized their battle had only just begun. If this moment touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with us. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. David woke before dawn, as he always did, but instead of preparing for work, he sat by the window, staring at the horizon. Mary busied herself in the kitchen, though her hands shook as she poured water into the kettle. Neither spoke of the previous night, but the weight of their children's words lingered in the silence between them. By midday, the children returned. Their faces were stiff, their voices sharper than ever. Michael was the first to speak. "Have you made your decision?" His tone was more demand than question. David straightened his back, his jaw firm. "Our decision is final. We will not sell this house." Anna scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "So you'd rather live in ruins, clinging to dead memories? Fine. Don't expect us to waste our lives watching you fade away in this broken place." Mary stepped forward, her voice pleading. "Anna, this isn't just a building. It's all we have left. This house saw your first steps, your birthdays, your late-night studies. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" But her words fell flat. Sarah looked away, her eyes clouded with guilt, but she didn't speak up for her parents. Michael's jaw tightened. "Then you've made your choice. Don't come to us later asking for help. From now on, you're on your own." The words struck Mary like a knife. She reached out, trying to grasp his hand, but Michael pulled away. Anna turned sharply toward the door, muttering under her breath, "Stubborn old fools." And just like that, they walked out. No hugs, no goodbyes. Just the sound of the front door slamming shut, echoing through the empty hallways. Mary sank to the floor, her sobs muffled against her hands. David bent down beside her, his own eyes glassy, though he forced himself to remain strong. He placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Let them go," he whispered, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. That evening the house felt emptier than ever. The laughter of the past seemed like ghosts clinging to the walls. Mary sat quietly at the dining table, staring at the 3 empty chairs where her children used to sit. "I cooked their favorite meal today," she murmured, her voice breaking, but they didn't even look back. David tried to console her, though his own heart ached. "We raised them with love. If they cannot see it, then we must learn to live without their gratitude." Night fell, and silence consumed the house. Mary cried softly into her pillow, her body trembling with grief. David sat awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The voices of his children echoed in his ears. Old-fashioned, stubborn, a burden. He had spent his life protecting his family, believing that love and sacrifice would be repaid with love in return. But now he realized they were truly alone. The next days passed in painful quiet. No letters, no phone calls, no footsteps of their children coming up the path. Just the sound of the wind against the broken windows and the creak of the old wooden floorboards. One evening, as Mary wiped her tears, David looked at her with a firm resolve. "If they don't need us any more," he said quietly, "then maybe it's time we go somewhere we're needed, somewhere we can start again." Mary's red eyes lifted to his. She didn't speak at first, but then, with a faint nod, she whispered, "Yes. If this house only brings us pain now, maybe we must leave it behind." And in that moment, though their hearts were heavy, a new thought took root. If their children had abandoned them, perhaps the mountains would welcome them instead. The days stretched on like shadows, each one heavier than the last. With their children gone, the silence in the house grew unbearable. Every corner echoed with memories. The hallway still carried the faint marks where the children had once measured their height with chalk. The garden bore the worn path of little feet chasing each other in laughter. Now those memories hurt more than they healed. Mary tried to hold on. Every morning she swept the porch as if expecting her children to come walking up the path. But the steps remained empty. "Maybe they'll return," she whispered, more to herself than to David, but he could see in her eyes that even she no longer believed it. One evening, after a meager supper of bread and boiled potatoes, David finally broke the silence. He placed his calloused hands on the table and spoke firmly. "Mary, we cannot go on like this. This house is nothing but walls filled with sorrow now. If we stay here, it will consume us." Mary's spoon trembled in her hand. "But where would we go, David? This is all we know. This is home." David's voice softened, but his resolve remained unshaken. "Home isn't bricks or wood. Home is where we find peace, and peace is not here anymore." Mary lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the cracks in the wooden table. She wanted to argue, to cling to the only place where her children had once belonged. But deep down, she knew he was right. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a reminder of loss. A few days later, they began to pack. Their belongings were few: a small chest of clothes, a bundle of old photographs, a kettle that had brewed countless cups of tea. Mary insisted on bringing a quilt she had stitched when their first child was born. "Even if they forgot us," she said quietly, "I won't forget them." At dawn, they left the house. Mary locked the door one last time, her hands shaking as she slid the key into her pocket. She turned back for a final glance, her eyes blurring with tears. The windows stared back at her like empty eyes, and the silence seemed to bid them farewell. They walked away hand in hand, their footsteps heavy but united. The city roads felt foreign, almost hostile. People hurried past them, indifferent to the elderly couple carrying bundles on their shoulders. By afternoon they had left behind the noise of the city, following a dirt path that wound into the hills. As the air grew cooler and the trees thicker, David stopped at a ridge. Below them, nestled between rocks and wild grass, stood a dilapidated cabin. Its roof sagged in the middle, its walls cracked and gray, as if forgotten by time itself. Mary's breath caught. "David, it's ruined!" He looked at her, determination flashing in his weary eyes. "It's broken, yes, but so are we, and just like us, it can be rebuilt." Mary gazed at the cabin, its frail frame silhouetted against the fading sun. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of something she thought she had lost. Hope. She took his hand firmly and whispered, "Then let's bring it back to life." That night, under a leaking roof in the cold mountain air, they huddled together. It was uncomfortable, but unlike their empty home, this place felt alive with possibility. And though their journey had only just begun, they had taken their first step toward turning ruins into a palace. The first night in the cabin was harsher than anything they had ever known. The wind howled through the gaps in the wooden walls, sneaking in like icy fingers. Rainwater dripped steadily from the broken roof, tapping against the floor in a maddening rhythm. Mary clutched the old quilt tightly around them both, but it did little to keep away the cold. "David," she whispered through chattering teeth, "this place, it's falling apart." "I know," he murmured, pulling her closer. His body ached from the day's journey, yet he refused to close his eyes. He stayed awake, listening to every creak, every drop, every groan of the cabin, as if it might collapse around them. Morning came with no warmth. The rising sun only revealed more of the damage, a roof half caved in, wooden beams rotting with age, and weeds creeping up through cracks in the floor. David stepped outside, his boots sinking into the wet soil, and saw their surroundings clearly for the first time. They were miles from the nearest village. The mountains loomed like silent guardians, beautiful yet unforgiving. Mary joined him, her hands wrapped tightly around the kettle they had carried. "What will we eat?" she asked. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with exhaustion. David sighed. "For now, what we have left." He pulled out a small cloth bundle, dried bread, a handful of beans, and 2 onions. It was barely enough for a meal, let alone for survival. That day, David began his work. With nothing more than an old hatchet he had carried from the city, he chopped branches from nearby trees. His hands, already rough from years of labor, blistered quickly, but he pushed through, determined to patch the roof before the next rain. Inside, Mary busied herself cleaning. She swept years of dust and leaves from the corners, her back aching with each stroke. She found a small wooden shelf half buried under debris and carefully placed their few belongings on it, as though arranging treasures in a palace. She lit a tiny fire from the scraps of wood David brought in, and soon the smell of boiling beans filled the air. By evening, the cabin looked only slightly better, but their hearts were lighter. Sitting together on the floor, sharing the hot meal, they smiled for the first time in days. "It's not much," Mary said softly, "but it's ours." The days that followed were no easier. A storm rolled in on the third night, lashing the cabin with rain. Water seeped through the patched roof, drenching their blankets. They shivered through the night, whispering prayers for the storm to pass. On another day, food ran short. David returned from the forest empty-handed, his shoulders slumped. "There's no game here. We'll have to make do with what little grows nearby." Mary pressed a hand on his arm, steady and firm. "Then we will eat less, but we will survive." Their struggles were constant, yet something had changed. Each hardship pulled them closer together. Each trial reminded them that though the world had turned away, they still had each other. And slowly, in the middle of the wilderness, their hearts began to feel alive again. Morning sunlight streamed weakly through the cracks of the patched roof, painting the cabin in streaks of gold. David awoke with aching muscles, but a determined spirit. Each day had been a battle, yet each morning he rose with renewed resolve. The wilderness tested him, but it had not broken him. That day, with a hammer borrowed from a kind villager, he began strengthening the walls. His hands were swollen raw from endless work, but he carried on. "This house may not have been built for us," he muttered, driving another nail into the wood, "but it will stand because of us." Mary, meanwhile, was outside tending to the small patch of soil she had cleared. The ground was stubborn, refusing to yield at first, but she pressed her palms into it, planting seeds she had begged from the villagers. Tiny sprouts began to push through, fragile yet full of promise. She smiled faintly, whispering to them as though to her own children, "Grow strong, as we must." Weeks turned into months, and the cabin slowly transformed. The leaky roof was mended. The cracked walls were patched with wood and clay. The dirt-stained windows now glistened after countless washes. Inside, Mary had placed flowers in a chipped vase, stitched new covers for their old pillows, and laid rugs woven from scraps. The once dark, broken place now radiated warmth. One evening, as the fire crackled in their hearth, David sat beside Mary and looked around. "Do you see this?" he said with pride. "We were left with nothing, yet look what we've built." Mary reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "It may not be grand, but it's filled with love, and that's more than our children ever understood." As word spread through the nearby village, people began to see the cabin differently. Where they once laughed at the couple's foolish attempt to live alone in the mountains, they now came seeking advice. Neighbors offered wood, nails, even seeds. A carpenter helped reinforce the porch. Children from the village often stopped by, charmed by Mary's garden and David's quiet stories. The cabin that had once stood as a ruin became a symbol of resilience. Years later, when their children finally returned, expecting to find frail, defeated parents, they were struck speechless. Before them stood a glowing home, smoke rising warmly from the chimney, flowers blooming in the garden. Inside, David and Mary sat by the fire, not broken, not bitter, but at peace. The children lowered their heads, ashamed, unable to speak. Mary, with gentle eyes, broke the silence. "We asked for nothing but your love. When you turned away, we found strength in each other. And here, in this little palace, we discovered happiness." As the fire crackled and the mountain winds whispered through the trees, the truth became clear. Home was not made of money or possessions, but of love, patience, and the courage to begin again. If this moment inspired you, show some love with a like and subscribe to be part of the next story.